You're listening to Sweet Talk, all things maple.
I'm Aaron Whiteman, recording today from the Arnott Forest at Cornell University. Joining me is my colleague and co-director of the Cornell Maple Program, my North Country counterpart, Adam Wild. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Aaron. It's great to finally be back in the studio.
Yeah, I know it's been a while, and part of that is because we've been busy with so many projects. First, there was Maple Camp.
Yeah, that's right. We launched an all-new maple camp at the Arnott Forest in September, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think everyone enjoyed the new hands-on curriculum, but it took a lot of work to pull that week-long class together. However, that's not what's been eating up our time, is it, Adam?
No, unfortunately, the real culprit is something we're all familiar with. That's projects. There never seems to be an end to projects in the woods and in the sugar house.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And that's the fun part, right? Puttering around in the woods, solving problems and making improvements. But there are other things we need to take time for to operate successful maple enterprises. And one topic I think deserves more attention is business management.
Yeah, that's correct, Aaron. Collecting a lot of sap and making a good crop of syrup is the goal of every sugar maker. But if you don't have good business management skills, you might not be successful as a business, even if you make a lot of syrup.
And business management requires a whole different set of skills, which can seem daunting if you don't have a background in business. But fortunately, there are some really great educational tools for learning business management coming out of the University of Vermont Extension program. Mark Cannella has created some really excellent, user-friendly materials for business management that are tailor-made for maple enterprises. Mark is an associate extension professor at the University of Vermont, where he serves as the Farm Business Management Specialist.
Today, we are fortunate to have Mark as a guest to share some important business planning insights and tell us a little more about his online resources.
Let's have a listen. Hi, Mark. Welcome to Sweet Talk.
Hey, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. And you're joining us today from Wisconsin, and I understand you're there for the opening day of the International Maple Conference. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Joint conference of the North American Maple Syrup Council and the International Maple Syrup Institute, and we'll be here for, 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, and that's a long overdue conference. I believe the last one was in Duluth in 2019, right?
That's right. Yeah, we were in Duluth, and there was flooding downtown and a lot of memories, and then pretty soon after, we stopped meeting in person.
Yeah, you remember that. I was there too. Lake Superior got a little ugly.
For sure. Yeah, there were waves lapping into the lobby of our lakeside hotel.
That's right. That made it exciting and it made it memorable. I thought that was fun. Maybe that's a little bit, I don't know. I'm sure the hotel management didn't appreciate it, but I thought it was fun and exciting.
I will say it was a bizarre weather circumstance and the downtown flooded, but if anything, it emphasized how valuable it can be to be places with people, because I think a lot of people connected there. And I'm certainly I consider myself somewhat new to the maple community. We had a lot of time to connect with people, and we haven't been able to do that. So I think there's a lot of people looking forward to the next few days.
Yeah, and I look forward to getting out there later this week. And I definitely appreciate you making time for us when you're on the road.
No problem.
So let's begin by having you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role with Vermont Extension.
So I'm Mark Cannella. I am an Extension Associate Professor with the University of Vermont Extension. I've been in this role since 2011. Originally, I was hired as a farm business specialist, so it's good to know in Vermont Extension world, we don't have county agents. We don't necessarily have regional programs. We have specialists that are faculty members, and we generally try to cover the state with programming and program development. So since 2011, I've been the director of what was our farm viability program and has developed into what we call our agricultural business program. So we have a variety of outreach education programs focused on farm, forest, and maple business management. And overall, our goals have changed and expanded as our staffing has changed. I still play the role as the key faculty member, and we have a number of outreach professionals. Overall, our mission is to provide outreach business management education. So that could be generalized education on financial statement preparation or business planning. Project by project, we provide specialized programs for particular sectors or particular types of farms, depending on if a specific audience is seeking to access some programming. And more recently, and been called to do more work in applied economic research. And that can go in a couple different directions, but there's definitely a great synergy with formal research and the extension role that we have to make those connections and provide relevance and stakeholder connections to more rigorous research. So I've been involved in that more recently.
It sounds like you cover a lot of ground. So you direct this program, but do you work specifically more with maple, or is it just one of many crops that you cover in your own work?
Yeah, great question. My coverage has changed. When I first began my job, I was very much a farm business planner that had this role to work within a program and potentially maybe grow or develop the program in different directions. So 10 years ago, I was spending a lot of time visiting farms and doing in-depth business planning, more consultative service type work. Fits in the extension outreach world for sure, but a different type of work. Smaller number of people reached on business preparation, business plan development. As the program has changed and we've brought on more staff, my role has shifted quite a bit. So Maple is one of the few communities where I really still do field some calls, do some consultation. I am doing direct work with producers as calls and questions come in. In the other sectors, dairy, vegetables, small fruits, we've got staff that generally take that role of the direct service, and I provide more of a supportive role, developing programs, grant management, evaluation. Maple has really been the one sector that I've been able to carve out my role as an educator, running classes, presenting at conferences like this, working with the industry associations directly. So Maple really is the place where I think I have a more activity and more direct contact with producers than the other sectors now.
Yeah, and I think we all really appreciate having you in the maple community. And you provide a very unique resource, I think, in terms of extension. I don't know of any other maple business specialists out there. If there is one, I don't know about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it's been well received because I have background in maple from some childhood memories, and then I did work as a small scale sugar maker at an educational farm. I had background in maple, and then I got interested in business management and economics, so I became kind of a generalist. And then I've made my way back into the maple community, and it feels like the timing has been right. As the industry has grown, there's been great amounts of research on sustainable production and efficient production. That research has been great. And meanwhile, I think there has been less attention on economics and small business finance, things of that nature. So I'd claim that the timing has probably been the most in my favor, and we're still trying to figure out the right programming method to serve the community.
Yeah. In my interactions with maple producers, it seems like that's one of the needs that's out there is the service you're providing. So with that, let's get right into it. Using your maple eye, your business acumen, when you go out and you make contact with maple producers, visit sugar houses, do workshops, things like that, what are some of the traits you see that are distinct to maple operations, if there are any, like size, ownership structure, management methodology, things like that?
Yeah, the maple community I find is unique in that everyone has a very strong identity as a maple producer. So everyone really brings this connection and identity with maple and let's say maybe forestry. The thing that's really unique, often challenging in my role, is their business models really run a wide range. We have a long and strong legacy of maple production historically in the northern United States. And what's been born out of that legacy, I think, is this real mix of hobby, lifestyle, and what we can call backyard maple production that still occurs and is terrific, blended with part-time enterprises, mid-scale enterprises, and even larger enterprises. So I think that one of the universal characteristics is people love maple. And then part of my job as a business educator is to try to understand what about their interests in maple integrates with objectives for business performance, satisfaction as a business owner. And that can be difficult when you have a range of people at much different scales of business and much different styles of marketing or production systems.
Yeah, I see that too. As someone that's a longtime sugar maker, it seems like 20, 30 years ago, a lot of maple operations were nested within a family farm, which operated as a small business. And now we have a lot of maple producers who are new to it, who are making maybe a few hundred gallons or 1,000 gallons a year. So it's not a full-time business for them. And then there's those mega producers that have a full-time staff and are tapping 100,000 trees or more, or fairly large scale. I guess that kind of leads to the next question is what are some of the business challenges then for maple producers across all scales?
Yeah, I think each producer, as you know, every maple enterprise can be quite unique, whether it's the environmental conditions or the specific parcel. The nature of sap flow in a particular woods is unique in itself. And then you put generally a business owner or a manager in charge of that that's juggling a number of different skill sets from forestry and mechanics, what I like to call tree plumbing, which seems to be the, the real skill set of modern tubing systems. So you've already got a few skill sets. Then you roll in, let's add another skill set. How about food processing? Because now we've got a food processing system that's taking raw sap and converting it into a finished food product. That's great. Now we'll stop and we'll put that in barrels, or maybe we'll put it in retail canners, and now we'll run a retail food sale business on top of it. So I think that the opportunities are there. The challenges are diverse. So that's kind of a long introduction. Some of the universal challenges I would see: labor. We know from our applied research on maple finance that labor is one of the most important inputs into the business, that the time that owners and managers put into their business and the cost of that time is very real. The cost is real if you're paying employees, and even if you're not paying yourself as an owner, as an economist, I see that as a very real cost. It deserves at least attention and ideally compensation. So across the board, I'd say that labor it's a major constraint to every maple business. Whether you're a sole owner operator trying to get as much activity out of your business as you can possibly handle, labor is a consideration. If you're a scaling up business that's seeking to hire part-time or seasonal work to tap trees or to leak check, there's another labor issue there. Finding the labor, adjusting to becoming a manager and an employee is a different skill set that can present some challenges. So I'd start and put labor there as not a challenge for everyone, but I'd say a super important factor that needs attention. And in some cases, I think people can struggle with trying to juggle those different roles.
Can we drill down a little bit on the cost of time? Because I know that a lot of maple producers, as you mentioned, don't assign a value to their time. How would one go about approaching that for someone who hasn't really thought about that at all?
Yeah, the approach would be to call an economist and then complain when they give you the answer. Um, so we use the term opportunity cost in the economic world, and opportunity cost basically says that for every hour or minute you spend doing something, there's a cost based on what you give up or what you're unable to do in the meantime. So I could slap some general hourly rates. And in our research, we've taken generalized rates of 20, 22, $24 an hour, and we've applied that hourly rate to owner time with our benchmark program. We've asked participants to track or estimate the labor that they've put into their business that's been unpaid, and we apply 18, 20, $24 an hour, something in that range. And that's an attempt to reflect that there's certain things in a business that are lower value activities. Stacking firewood, for example, something that theoretically, if you had a person that you could pay a wage, would be a lower wage, hopefully under $20 an hour. And then there are different managerial and executive function type responsibilities like sales or grading syrup, things of that nature, that certainly should be worth 30, 40, $50 an hour. We came up with a number of 20-ish, and I would say it's actually still a little low for what people would give up in the other career space employment marketplace, but it at least signals that they do need to factor time into those business equations. Most importantly, for pricing, to honestly price your syrup or understand your costs, you really do need to reconcile that labor input.
Mm-hmm. Is there value beyond that for a smaller producer in valuing their time in that way?
Well, here's an interesting thing about valuing time. I've worked with dairy farm families for years. And for a farm that has to operate 365 days a year, as a dairy farm does, and for the family commitment and the vocation to that enterprise to keep it going, many families are all in. They're all in. Whatever amount of time it takes is the amount of time it takes. What's very unique about maple is because the harvest season for sap and syrup processing is very concentrated in the early months of the year. There are many people that can have viable enterprises that don't need to commit all their time to the maple enterprise. What that means is there's many people that are participating in maple enterprises that have other income earning activities that are important to their livelihood and their household that may actually intersect with maple season. So, what I've often found in the maple community, while many people at a very small scale or in a lifestyle mindset can't get their head around applying a value to their time, there are many people at small scales that juggle independent contracting businesses. You name the career. I've worked with people that do different things on the side. They have a very attuned awareness of how many hours of paid work they give up for maple. So this is where the circumstances it becomes very different depending on people's mindset, what they're giving up. And as a business planner, I ask people what they're hoping to gain. People that are hoping to gain a paycheck tend to be pretty well attuned to time. People that are maybe seeking other values from their maple enterprise, maybe that time factor is not so top of mind for them.
Yeah, certainly a lot of intangible values to being involved with maple production. But it sounds like, just as a general practice, it's good to be aware that time has value. And then in making rational decisions about your own income, it would make a lot of sense to assign a value and actually go through that exercise and understand how much opportunity in other areas you're foregoing in order to make maple.
Yeah, and I don't want to harp on labor tracking because this is literally tracking and valuing unpaid labor is one of the most challenging things as an economist to insert into the conversation because people want to discuss cash flow,
Mm-hmm.
they want to discuss investments, and this is kind of an intangible. But I will say that there are two very important things that are worth noting. For the maple sector to continue to develop, viable livelihoods and compensation is required. That doesn't mean that hobby scales and small scale enterprises can't persist. And I think it's a terrific feature of communities to do that. However, there will need to be some compensation there if we want to recruit people into this industry and recruit people into an industry that come from a different generation than the business owners we have now are, because we do have an aging class of farm and forest products business owners. So compensation is important for those individuals running the business. There's another real important feature to the community of maple producers, which is pricing. And this is an issue that you hear come up across all agricultural sectors. The concern of agriculture in the middle, these are families that do rely on their businesses for the mainstay of their family income, potentially being underpriced by people that are not valuing their time and labor. And this comes up, and I hear this certainly in the maple community of different regions and different pricing factors, where people will be somewhat disappointed if they see syrup marketed at a price that they feel is below the level that covers costs. Labor is the biggest cost. And so if unpaid labor is not factored in, we do run that risk in the community itself of pricing that is contentious. You're not breaking any rules, but we have to, as a community, sort of get our heads around that pricing situation.
Yeah, and I would concur with that and just add the detail that as maple grows, it's becoming a more and more important agribusiness sector from an economic development standpoint. So, from the perspective of Vermont state government and New York state government, they want to generate jobs through this activity. And if there are hobbyists out there that are just putting out their syrup there at a price that undercuts the commercial producers, that certainly becomes a concern. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is delicate. One of the things that I'm trying to learn is the difference in maple communities across the United States or the northern states that I've been starting to travel to. There are different scales and different expectations of what a maple business could be or should be. And like you said, in some regions, there's a clear opening for economic development, which is jobs and, creating livelihoods and creating good wages. That's the presence that I feel in Vermont and the direction that things seem to be going or have gone. I'm expecting in the next 3 days here in Wisconsin to speak with maple producers in other regions and to say something and potentially want to eat my words back or expect that they're going to look at me funny and they're going to be coming from a different region with a different expectation of scale of business, a different expectation of markets based on what they have access to, and possibly a different objective to what maple does within their community.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is in the world that I'm in. I find that it's exciting to work on this cusp of small business management and economic development, because there are a lot of very real tensions there, healthy tensions, but I'd say just a dynamic change system, and it's different everywhere.
Yeah, and I guess one of the luxuries we have right now is just because there's such a huge growth in demand, 20% in back-to-back years, that we have a little space for people selling at very different price points without driving the price down.
Yeah, and something I seek to try to understand better, but we'll take a stab at the dynamics of the market. Let's just go into basics that, okay, we live in the United States, a rather well-developed economy, a rather high standard of living. Maple syrup I would categorize as a luxury sweetener. If you were to compare that to different sweetener options available to household consumers or industrial uses, let's say, maple is expensive, much more expensive than beet sugar or cane sugar. So we've got a high priced product, a super specialty product with a lot of great features and very high quality, but it's a high priced product. So we're selling into potentially a luxury market, which brings its own weirdness to the classical interpretations of supply and demand and price sensitivity. So let's just remember that we've got a luxury product. We also have a product with a long historical legacy, and there's a wholesomeness, and there's sort of a history and a tradition of maple. So you kind of have two different markets happening at the same time. And what I'm trying to figure out in a lot of the work that I'm doing now is to understand that we may have 1,000 small scale producers that have a presence in the local newspaper in their communities with open sugar house events and specialty products, which is in fact terrific. It's a great thing for maple to have that diversity. However, we've also got standardized syrup that's being sold nationally and internationally to some extent. Mostly the Canadian syrup has got a stronger export potential right now than the US. There's an enormous volume of syrup that moves through standard grocery channels. And I would argue the majority of syrup in this country is moving through those standard channels. And as we were told, it's pure maple syrup without a lot of differentiation aside from standardized grades and meeting quality standards. So we have this really interesting dynamic of people's identity with maple, their perception of products, their perception of uniqueness in the marketplace that they operate in. However, we've got this massive volume of, I don't want to say utility syrup, it's still a specialty product. It's still super expensive, but it's going to people that are much more price sensitive at a national scope. And I think we're trying to reconcile that as a maple community. I think that's one of the challenge points for the community is trying to understand strategically, is there room for everyone? And how do we work together to lift maple, knowing that we have this very different identity to different people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It seems like that's one of the main challenges, teasing out how to set price. And I know there are a lot of different strategies for that. One of them that I know a lot of beginning maple producers rely upon when they're trying to make money is tracking their costs and setting their price based on their cost plus whatever they want their profit margin to be. But tracking costs seems like it is one of the challenges for maple producers. Is that something you see as well?
Yeah, for sure. People love to track income. People need to be pushed and nudged a little bit to track costs. We've been doing an increased number of business management programs with UVM Extension to support business owners through those steps of business management. And it is a challenge for some people. Namely, I'll go back to the labor issue. One of the biggest issues is the costs aren't always cash based. So that's a factor that's challenging, and something we try to educate people on is the difference between cash based cost and then these other costs, which are real but maybe a little more abstract in a sense. I've been teaching short courses for the past 3 years. They've been online with COVID, which worked great actually to reach a national audience. And we've been working through basic financial training classes. And the cost management session or the cost management module is built into that. So we have calculators online that we have available for people to use on their own. I teach the classes to enable people that maybe would like a little bit of support or would like the group atmosphere to work through that process. And we certainly encourage it. I would tell people it takes a level of discipline to sit down and to pull your receipts together, to have a organized system for bookkeeping in advance. The process is not complicated. It's a matter of prioritizing your time, I think, and or as an entrepreneur, recognizing the business needs cost analysis. And as a business owner, sometimes your job is not to do it all, but to find someone that can provide that service to you. We don't all change the oil in our cars. We don't all change our snow tires off. Even if we could, we get other people to do it because they specialize in it. So that's the message I would send is, cost analysis is valuable. It's important. As a business owner, it doesn't need to be you that does it, but it should be you that makes sure the business gets that.
Yeah, agreed. And in my experience talking business with maple producers, one of the challenges with tracking costs is just simply accounting skills. Introducing concepts like accrual accounting versus cash and things like that, they seem like they're pretty key. I don't think it's all that complicated once you get the hang of doing a more rigorous accounting method, but what advice can you give people that want to get started kind of transitioning from the shoebox full of receipts to something a little more formalized?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, my coworker Chris Lindgren with UVM Extension is teaching a short course on Maple Records, and we will have program content, and I'll expect that we'll try to continue to teach that content in the coming months and years. So UVM Extension has taken our first attempt at a records keeping class. There are other resources available. Sometimes extension services in different regions have it. Small business development centers are good options for people as well to meet with an advisor and get some coaching. Anytime that you're doing something that's not familiar or not your strong suit, I suggest trying to find someone that can support you through that process. So, a class, a business advisor is a great step towards moving into basic records. Another important or helpful strategy for record keeping is to think about how you manage the time of your day and your week. I've had I've had some farmers that have made this transition from the shoebox method to a more sophisticated record keeping system. And I've gotten two great tips from them. They will say, think about your work week, think about when your brain and your time is most available for something. Generally, early in the week and in the mornings is the time to work on things like this. So that's great feedback. I've heard people say, I'll do it this evening. I'll do it at 5. I'll do it after the workday's over. No, you won't do it. Honestly, you won't do it then. But if you wake up early or you do something at 6 or 7 in the morning before your employees show up or before the crisis of the day emerges, you will make progress. So that's one suggestion on records. Figure out what time in your day and your week you can actually have your undivided attention on it. The other thing I have heard from people is to celebrate when you make progress. And I think the challenging part about being a business owner is there's always something else. But I have had people that said, I set a goal to set up a QuickBooks system and to get 1 month of reports accurate. And I bought myself a 6-pack of beer, or I went out for dinner. I went to that restaurant, the steakhouse that is reserved for special occasions. So I think that's a great reminder that people do need to think about their own behaviors and their own habits and find ways to celebrate something that brings it full circle for you. It's important for the business, but it is difficult. So you got to do something to liven it up and make it happen.
Yeah, something I really appreciate about your approach to learning, Mark, is your ability to distill things down to those little nuggets of wisdom. I really appreciated that when I sat in on your course. I took the Maple Business Management course, and it was great. So I strongly recommend those courses to folks who are listening today. And I know those are linked on your website. Is that right? When you offer those classes, do you announce them on your website, or how do you inform people?
Yeah, our website, www.maplemanager.org, will have an events page. It's getting overhauled right now, but for those that take the time to look at the homepage at maplemanager.org, there should be an events or a program link. We've generally run webinars through the summer and fall, and the short course season right now is wrapping up. The intention is that we'll continue to do short courses, likely, I'd say, in the September to December timeframe every year. I will also mention to listeners that as we're shifting away from everything online, I am seeking producer associations or different groups of producers across the country that are interested in maple business programming, and myself or Chris plan on traveling to these locations to offer those. So there's an opportunity there if you can get a group of people in a room where we can come and join you. And I'll say that we certainly love doing 50-minute and 1 hour presentations on business management, but I don't find them to be a tremendous learning experience for those people that really want to think about it, strategize, and move into implementation of new business practices. So we'll try to be doing some more intensive programs that maybe half days or whole day seminars in that form.
How many people would you need present to justify a trip, say out to New York or Pennsylvania or someplace like that?
Well, I will be going to Ohio this fall, and my goal mentally is at least 6 to 10 people in a committed classroom environment for the better part of a day, for at least call it 4 or 5 hours of direct contact. And the nice thing about a conference like in Ohio and then again in Wisconsin in January is we're going to do a business intensive the day prior to the standard conference. So I can do the business intensive, and then if invited to present during the conference, I can lump them together and justify the whole trip. I'll be honest, we've been benefiting from federal grants that enable us to do this work. So the next year or two, we have a lot more flexibility. 2, 3 years out, if we actually got to costing out programs, may have a different answer for you. Maybe really trying to get 15 people in the room, 20 people in the room, but 6 to 10, I think, is a good start.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. I will definitely encourage my extension colleagues to reach out to you and see if we can put some classes together in New York at the very least.
On that note of business education, Adam Wild at Cornell University has reached out to me last year, and then again this December. I'll be doing like a single session as a part of that Maple program. I mentioned the Ohio program. So if there are people that are offering Maple programs across the zone of production and forestry or syrup processing, we can add in a business segment as well. And I think there's an opportunity there, especially if you've got an audience of people that are working through different parts of Maple. I'm very familiar with sliding a little business education in with the other items.
Yeah, that course you mentioned with Adam Wild, that's the Beginning Farmer 152 class with the Cornell Small Farms program. But I think it will probably have started by the time this episode airs. But folks can check that out if they want to and maybe sign up next year. Speaking of website-based resources, your website, Maple Manager, has a lot more to offer than just links to events, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what's there, what tools are available?
Yeah, for sure. We've put a lot of effort into that website over the past 4 years now. So maplemanager.org has the events, and we do have recordings of any webinars that we've done over the past 2 or 3 years. So for those that would like to watch recordings, they can do that there. I've put a lot of effort into publications and guides that have populated that website. So there's two major components to that website from a business development perspective. We've got a tools section, and then we've got resources or literature. Let me start with the tools. We've got a business planning module that it's very bare bones, but it allows people to see the questions and to start to fill out the sections of a business plan. That's one of them that doesn't get used very much. We've got a yield calculator, a sales and pricing forecast tool, which is great for business owners to work through the different retail pricing levels of different container sizes and to see what their revenue potential is. We do have a cost, budget, and cost analysis calculator where people can put in their information and then see those total costs come out on a per gallon or per pound basis, which again is very, very powerful. And you can imagine if people use the cost analysis calculator and take that information and then go to the pricing calculator, they can start to work with a pricing strategy to cover their costs. There's also a few SAP business calculators that are there. We have a profit and loss from SAP hauling calculator. People can calculate the costs of hauling SAP to understand what a reasonable range is and how to manage those investments. We also have a SAP pricing calculator, which we all see in different formats from Cornell and Ohio, but people like to use those and identify how to price their SAP.
Yeah, I think the calculators are very simple. Those are simple calculations, but it's so helpful to just run the numbers. There's so many of us that are just kind of doing mental math and think, well, I think I'm making money on this, but it's good to see the numbers and know.
For sure. And the intention of those calculators is that they are somewhat simplified. Maybe overwhelming for some people, but please give it a shot. But for the financial analyst and economist, there's a lot of categories that we decided not to include in order to make it simple, in order to not force people to scroll through 3 pages of categories. So we tried to find a happy balance there where people could put attention to the numbers and not ignore them. But maybe if they're looking for a next level analysis, this becomes the feeder into that.
Mm-hmm. I've gone through all those calculators a number of times, and I think they're very approachable and user-friendly. So I think they're wonderful tools.
That's great feedback. So we've got a number of business calculators on maplemanager.org for those that want to test scenarios and try different situations, do the analysis for the first time. The other section of that website, there's a lot of literature in the resources section. We embarked on a project 3 years ago to develop more legal resources for maple producers. So we updated sugar bush lease template, a sugar house lease template. We envision as maple grows, there will be a number of partnerships and different business entity formations. So we put out guides on joint venture templates, a template on an operating agreement for an LLC, and different resources for those that are going to be going into partnerships or co-ownership with other business owners. Most recently, we've published a series of startup investment profiles. Very basic, I would say somewhat coarse, but the idea was to allow people to see the potential investment level required for Maple enterprises at a number of scales. We've got startup profiles from 3,000 taps to 20,000 taps. Some of those profiles are SAP-only businesses. Some of them are SAP to syrup on multiple sites. And our intention there is specifically for people that are looking to get into Maple or looking to expand, to really have a good sense of what that investment level would look like so that they can begin to do the due diligence on accessing capital, working with their own financial advisors, maybe commercial lenders, with that intent of commercially scaled businesses that, as we discussed, the certain scale business that we think is probably most viable from an economic development perspective, those businesses will be capital intensive. And so we wanted to put resources out to start to support producers and support the lending community so that they can have a benchmark to refer to.
Yeah, scale certainly influences the financial strategy with a startup in Maple.
Yeah, for sure. And we talked about scale a little bit earlier today. It's a really interesting conversation because people have different expectations from their business. I do want to say, though, we have seen in our research that at larger scales, maple producers self-report stronger performance financially and economically from their businesses. And that is something that we have to really listen to from an owner livelihood perspective and from a maple sector development strategy. We need to understand what scales and what marketing plans could have potential viability.
Mm-hmm. Can you just briefly define large scale for the purposes of this conversation?
Yeah, I will tell you specific tap numbers because I think everyone has a different perspective on small and large. UVM did a Northeast Maple producer survey in 2019, I believe. And in that survey, we asked producers to identify their economic viability. Are they economically viable? Are they sustainable with access to other income? What we saw was producers over 5,000 taps were twice as likely to be economically viable than producers under 5,000 taps. However, that range of 5,000 taps could be a 6,000 tap producer up to 60,000 taps. So I'm dodging the question of what's large because I think someone with 1,000 taps looks at a 10,000 tap enterprise and they think that 10,000 tap enterprise is very large. Well, the 10,000 tap enterprise that's trying to figure out how to get big enough to maybe employ one or two full-time people all year is looking at that 40,000 tap operation and saying that one's very large.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very subjective. But we are trying to understand the tap counts and the business models at different counts to really get an understand of what a replicable business model could look like.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know you occasionally will encounter people out in the world who say, oh, my neighbor has this huge maple operation. And it turns out they have, 60, 80 taps in the woods, which that's a lot of buckets to carry. But when we're talking about scale, that's really changed a lot over the past 15, 20 years. Whereas 1 or 2,000 taps used to be a big operation. Now that's really almost hobby scale, even in New York.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that scale, it's subjective. And what I try to do in my business consultation education is to remind people that they need to be clear about their objectives and they need to be clear about their intentions. And if they're running a business as a business, well, let's talk business stuff. And those are universal conversations, whether you got 3,000 taps or you've got 10,000 taps. We're talking about finances, we're talking about labor efficiency and management. and we're talking about investments. Those are the same conversations at different scales. We may color in the details a little bit differently, but getting people to really understand where they're at and how they intersect with the community, which is, I think, that's that growth point. I think that a lot of us are working on right now is understanding how the Maple community wants to move forward.
Yeah, that's a good point in business in general. Comparing your business to another business is of limited utility in some ways. It's critical to focus on your finances, your goals, your objectives and strategies that you need to employ to kind of satisfy what you want to accomplish. So I think that's a really good point.
So another major challenge that maple producers are facing in 2022 certainly is inflation. There's been an increase in a number of costs, which includes labor costs for paid employees, packaging shortages and packaging cost increase, fuel cost increase, supplies and materials. All these costs have gone up. We've seen increases in market prices, which has been good. Often the market price increases can lag from the change in the input prices. So there's a very real dynamic of increasing costs challenging the prevailing prices in the marketplace, be it retail or even bulk. And maple producers are challenged by that in 2022.
And producers shouldn't be afraid to raise their prices, right? I'm hearing a lot of numbers in the 5 to 15% range that folks are raising their prices. I just raised my prices for Cornell maple syrup 8%. Is that sort of in line with what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think even last summer, people were anticipating a need, and going into the fall of 2021, people that really were on it were already going at 8 and 10% price increases going into the selling season last fall. And that's where the pricing indexes are. If you look at inflation, you just need to do that if you're going to keep up with the value or the loss of value in the dollar. Very appropriate to make those changes.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
One last challenge that I want to mention in 2022, we've mentioned inflation. We've had recent changes at the U.S. Federal Reserve that's impacting interest rates. We have enjoyed historically low interest rates for the past few years. That situation is changing with increased rates. Any maple producers at larger scales that are leveraged or that have existing borrowing may be facing changes in adjustable rate loans and mortgages. That is another cost factor that people will be managing, trying to squeeze some revenue out of a situation with costs going up. I also think an interest rate increase could have impact to the growth trends in the short term, depending on how people prioritize investments and consider expansions. So I think a larger kind of macroeconomic thing with inflation and interest rates does come home to the maple community, both with cost management and with the appetite for expansion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a tricky environment we're in right now. A lot of uncertainty. The rates are changing pretty rapidly. So hopefully it will be, what do they call it, like a V-shaped recovery from if we hit a recession or something rather quick.
Something that goes back up, I think, is the idea, right?
Right, and quickly. The sooner the better.
Yeah.
But we'll just have to see, and that's the challenge of business, right? You try to prepare for those challenging business times, and when you're benefiting from high profits and things like that, maybe looking at your resiliency over the long term and making provisions for the hard times that are ahead.
I think that's a great point, Aaron, that finding not just the wherewithal to work through difficult things, but having some financial cushion, it's a very important thing for a business to navigate these bumps in the road.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A little reserve fund or a rainy day fund if you're a small business, and a more strategic reserve fund perhaps if you're a large business.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Mark, there's so much more I'd like to ask you, but I've kept you for a long time and I want to let you get to the conference. So I'll thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming on the show, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk again and explore some other topics.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I appreciate the invitation. It's great to be able to talk maple business.
All right. Take care.
Goodbye.
So what do you think, Adam? What did Mark share that resonated with you?
One thing that really strikes me is the diversity of business objectives that are intertwined with the identity of being a sugar maker. Other crops have that same phenomenon, but it's really strong with maple producers.
Oh, that's definitely true. And I've gone through all of Mark's materials on the Maple Management website, and something he's done really well is account for those non-traditional business objectives sugar makers often have. and he's integrated them into the business management process. Well, one example is an objective of your maple business might be to create an employment opportunity for family members and pass on the family tradition. That's a good example of a valid business goal that isn't directly related to maximizing profits or cash flow. But Mark encourages including those types of objectives into the business planning process.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I think that's something that a lot of maple producers will appreciate. So how about you, Aaron? What did you take away from this interview?
Well, one thing that I took away is I think Mark's comments about valuing time are very important. Assigning a dollar value to your labor is important for a lot of reasons. And that kind of intersects with a problem we've been working to address, and that's workforce development.
Yeah, that's a great point, Aaron. As maple businesses grow into these big enterprises that require a whole staff of skilled employees, it's important to start understanding the value of those skills on the labor market.
Yeah, and coming out of the pandemic, we're kind of in this new world in terms of what labor costs, labor availability, as well as a whole different marketplace where there's a lot higher demand. And this comes at a time when a lot of maple enterprises are entering kind of a large commercial phase. So there are these big enterprises that really have to think about these things. So all the points Mark has made are really relevant and will become more relevant, I think, in the near future.
Yeah, and I sat in on a workshop with Mark Cannella once, and I know one thing that he mentioned was that, business planning and management can really be daunting, but he really encouraged to just kind of start with one little piece.
Maybe we should all just get started on business planning if we haven't already, and that's half the battle, is just getting it going.
Oh, for sure. It always is for me.
Well, it seems like there's a lot more to talk about on this topic, so we'll have to have Mark on the show again soon. Until next time, I'm Aaron Whiteman.
And I'm Adam Wild. Thanks for listening to Sweet Talk, all things maple. Thank you for joining us for Sweet Talk, all things maple with Aaron and Adam. Sweet Talk is produced by the Cornell Maple Program and is made possible from funding from the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. All music was obtained from Blue Dot Sessions. For more information on all things maple, visit cornellmaple.com. Join us next time for more Maple Sweet Talk. Have a sweet day.